Hey guys, it's Nerdnick, and I'm bringing you part 3 of the How to Design Dollar Tree Foam Board Airplanes tutorial. Now if you followed the previous 2 tutorials, you might notice that this image and this plane is different than what we previously worked on. I've been thinking a lot, and I ended up deciding that because the de Havilland 88 is so different from what I've done so far, it's going to be a unique challenge that I'm definitely going to conquer and I'm definitely going to continue to work on, but it might not be the best subject to transfer the knowledge that I have to you guys on what I've learned so far. So what I'm going to do is go with a more traditional plane that I've been hoping to design. I really like the Spitfire look, I like how it flies, and it's a more standard design where it doesn't have some of the interesting challenges that they're going to come up with the dual engine setup. So this plane, the clip-wing Spitfire, kind of fits the more standard traditional build, and it'll more than likely be something in line with what you're probably thinking of designing for your first plane. So what I've done so far is I've gone ahead and recreated the amount of work we've already done. I've traced out the fuselage, the vertical stabilizer, and also the horizontal stabilizer. So in terms of where we are, we're right back to where we were with the de Havilland 88, but we're just going to be switching over to this plane. Now before I go on, I want to take note too that this plane does not, or these plans, sorry, do not come with the cross-section view for the formers. I don't have a reference for these, so this is not the best choice of plans. I'm sorry, picture. It's not the best choice of a picture, but I couldn't find one that had the specific shape. Now this plane is pretty straightforward in terms of the formers. Are going to be very half circle like, so I'm not too concerned. I'm going to wing it on this one, and you definitely can on any of the planes you build. This one should work out. It's still looking pretty scale because it's just not crazy or anything. Fuselage is pretty straightforward. So for this one, I don't have the former shape that I had in the previous one. That's okay. Another thing I want to call attention to as you're designing your planes is, as you shape the fuselage, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, what kind of motor am I going to build this plane for? What kind of motor do I expect to put on this plane? Most of the noses of your fuselage is going to end right about where your nose cone would go, or where the spinner goes. And for the most part, that's fine. So in this case it was, so I went ahead and just followed it perfectly fine. But then the follow-up question to that is, okay, so where does the power pod go, or where is the top of the fuselage going to end, so that when your motor is installed, because your motor is going to be sitting, in here somewhere, right? And then you got your shaft coming out and your prop on it. So where does this plate need to be so that your motor length will fit properly with the plane? The most common motor size that you're going to see used is probably either 26 to 35 can. That's a pretty standard size motor. So when you look at, okay, what do I want to actually use, if you have a specific motor in mind, you can measure and find out exactly where it needs to go, or you can kind of design it to fit that range, right? So to do that, you need to have your power pod reference. So I've already pasted it over here, and wherever the end of the power pod is where your motor is going to be bolted to, right? So the motor is going to stick off here, right? But it's actually bolted or screwed in right at the front. So we need to figure out how far back is this going to sit. Where's the power pod actually going to sit to give me the right motor length? So that's taking the power pod. You can kind of put it in place where the tabs are here. These are actually going to sit up inside of the fuselage, but with the standard style that we're going to use, there's going to be a top plate that runs, and actually is going to extend down the width of this tab. So the power pod is going to sit right here, because the rest of this is going to be occupied with foam, and that foam is going to have a hole in it for the tab to fit in. So when I place my power pod in the right position in terms of height, now I can kind of decide where is it going to sit. So what you need to make sure when you do this, before you move forward to the next step of the wing, of further in the fuselage, you need to make sure that your plane is going to fit the scale of the power pod. To do that, you need to make sure when you place the power pod where it's going to go, you have enough room here as well as back here. If your plane starts to taper, if the plane is very short and you need to start to taper the plane, normally that's right around where the cockpit is, where it starts to then get thinner towards the tail. Not all planes are that way, but that's pretty common. But if it starts to taper early, you're going to get in trouble because your power pod is, it comes to here, so I have to maintain the same width up till this point on the plane. So if you're at a point right now where you test this and your plane needs to taper earlier, you might need to scale your plane larger so the power pod can fit comfortably. Or you need to make a decision, maybe this isn't going to be a swappable if you want to keep the size that you have. The next thing you need to make sure is that when your power pod is placed here, that you have enough room on this sidewall of the power pod to extend all the way to the base of the fuselage. Now on this plane, the fuselage top is going to be here and the bottom is way down here, right? So the power pod is going to hang with quite a bit of space. Now this space is going to get eaten up pretty quick by the wing. Your wing's going to be significantly thick. So one of the things that you need to consider is how thick are we making the wing, or how thick are you going to make the wing, because your wing has to fit in this amount of space. If your wing ends up being too fat, or your fuselage isn't tall enough, then your power pod's going to not fit. So this plane, just as a reference, the power pod sidewall sits on top of the bottom plate, so it's actually this tall. This is how tall the power pod is when it's all glued together and put into place. The wing that we're going to be building, and that I recommend building, is 1 sheet thick on top of foam, so about 0.5 is a good number to use, 0.5 centimeters. It's going to be 0.5 centimeters on the bottom, right, piece of foam. So you have 2 pieces of foam now, so you basically we did the total here, 1 centimeter. And then the thickness of your spar. So how thick is your spar going to be? On all my builds so far, I've used the same size spar. And actually I recommend doing this. I've made a spar template where I have the whole wing holes and I also have the spar itself. All the spars that I make kind of fit into this category, so I can just copy this in and measure it and cut it as I need. But this spar, if you use this exact one that I'm using, you're looking at a spar that's going to sit about 1.19 or 1.2 centimeters high. So if I go back to my image and I add that on, so I've got my 2 sheets of foam thickness and then I've got my 1.2 spar, this is essentially how thick my wing is going to be. Oops. So when I look at the spar height and I look at the 2 sheets of foam, you need to make sure you have enough space from your top plate to your bottom plate, and then with the power pod to fit. So this is fine. I actually have, I have a lot of room here, right? I have way more than I need, so I'm good. That means I have enough clearance, and I could even make the power pod bigger if I needed to fit a bigger battery or anything that would still fit inside, but that's something you need to measure. So we're gonna go and erase these lines now. Okay, so once you've figured that out, you should be good in terms of fuselage. One other thing on this plane that I want to bring note to is that there's a bit of an angle here. If I draw straight back from my horizontal stabilizer and go forward, I end up with a plane that has very little room to make a proper former. A former this tall is going to look like a little sandwich. It's going to be flattened. There's not going to be a lot of curve to the nose or to the fuselage going back on top. So I decided to bring it down a bit so I had enough width here to make a nice curve with the formers. But what that ended up doing is, if I were to continue that line, I'd end up way too low with my stabilizer. So I drew the flat part here up to the end of the stabilizer, then I just curved it down. I don't recommend doing a sharp curve here, because that will show up when you do your poster board. You'll see that line and it'll make a little groove. So definitely do it gradual. So verify that when you're making your plane to make sure that wherever you're engine pod and everything's going to mount lines up. If it doesn't, you need to make a decision of how you want to adjust that. Some planes have it lower, the horizontal stabilizer sits down here, some it's higher. A nice gradual adjustment is usually fine. Okay, so now that we've done that, I wanted to cover that in the last video, but I forgot to mention it, so I wanted to make sure we talked about that right now, just so you can catch any mistakes early. You don't want to have to go back after you've designed the whole plane and realize, oh no, the power pod doesn't fit, or oh no, something's not lined up, or it's not wide enough, or my formers, they're not tall enough, so my plane looks weird. So make sure you catch those things early, and those are the best ways to go about that. Okay. All right, so we're gonna jump into the wing now. The wing is, I would say, it's pretty straightforward initially, and then it gets more complicated as you decide some of the features of the wing. Now, the wing is one of the biggest pieces of the plane that determines how is it going to fly. Is it going to be a fast plane? Is it going to be a slow, gentle plane? Is it going to perform well in wind? Is it going to have, is it a low wing? Is it a high wing? How do all those things affect the plane's flight, the characteristics? And so initially we're just going to trace out the wing. There's nothing really special about it. The only thing you want to note for the first trace is that you can't really do a curved leading edge. You can do slight curve, but anything more than even a few degrees, I would say probably more than 1 degree, is too much. It won't work because when you fold the foam board over, it causes bunch up issues. Now, if you do have a wing that has a very drastic curve, some wings are kind of bent like this, you can do this, but what it's going to require is a split in the top piece, so that when you fold it over, it's able to match up. I'm building an A10 right now, and that's one of the cases. The plane taper, or the wing tapers towards the end, but it does it. It has the two lines coming off of the fuselage, but then they both kind of come in a little bit. And so to do that, you have to get a little creative with how you adjust, and I can pull that up to show you what that looks like. But for this plane, there is a slight curve, but I'm going to have to basically ignore it. I have to decide what line I want to follow, but I can't really do a leading edge curve very well with this technique. So I'm going to start roughly in the middle of the fuselage here and get my line going. And I need to decide, do I want just a perfectly straight line? No, that doesn't work. I am going to come down at a little bit of an angle. Now, when we're making this first leading edge line, one of the things you want to decide here, if you're not able to do just a perfectly straight line, is where is my under camber going to go? Where is the bottom of the wing going to end, so that it doesn't have a closed off wingtip. Now, it's important right now to decide that, because when I draw this first line, wherever I choose to end it, my straight line, that's roughly where the under camber is going to go. Okay, so for right now, I'm actually going to just pick a spot, and we're going to come back and we can adjust that later if it's off. But I'm just going to say right about here is where I'm going to decide that. And the reason that's important too is because now I can actually curve. So once I decide how much of the wing is going to join together, I can then start my curve, because this next part is not going to be folded over. It's not going to have two sides to it. Okay, so I'm going to just pick here as a point right now, and we'll talk about what that means here in a minute. But now I can actually go and I can do a little bit of a curve, because this part doesn't actually have a reason why it won't work. So we're going to go ahead and just get our trace on here. These extra little bumps and grooves I'm going to ignore. I don't think they're necessary for the design or look of the plane. So the trailing edge can be as curvy or shapely as you want, since it does not have a bevel joint like the leading edge does. You don't have any restrictions. Okay, looks like here we're going to go straight, and we're going to come in just a little bit past halfway, so when I do the fold over, everything works out nice. Okay, so step one, we've got it traced. We're going to go ahead and add our aileron lines as well. And this one is going to be red for 50%, so we're going to throw that in. And then since it's the last line I drew, it goes on top of the other lines, and I don't want that. I actually want it to go underneath so it's cleaner. So I'm going to grab this. This is a layer 25, and I'm going to go ahead and just scroll down, and I'm going to drop it below the rest of the ones I just made so that the black lines here go over the top of it. So now it looks nice and clean. Okay, so we've got the basic outline, and what I'm going to do is just go ahead and join all these layers now so that they're one piece. I'm going to rasterize them, and then I'm going to merge them. So now we have our wing top. So I'm going to go ahead and label that just for my reference. And the next thing I'm going to do is decide how far does a wing go in. So we want to get right in the middle so that we have a proper, wing size. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and pick a line that looks right about in the middle. Yeah, looks good. Looks good to me. Okay, so we've got that, and then I'm going to go ahead and just rasterize this. If you don't rasterize the layer, you can't erase it or do anything with it. It's a uneditable piece of information when it comes to what we want to do. So I'm going to rasterize it, and I'm going to go ahead and just erase so it's a nice clean finish there. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Select my wing, get this one. And actually, since these are both perfectly straight lines, I can actually grab this tool, the select tool, and just delete. And then we get a perfect cut. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and join these two together, the wing top and shape 1. So now we have half of our wing done. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out here just to show you that it is one piece. Okay, cool. So the next thing we want to do is we need to start shaping the underside of the wing. So again, this first line is going to be joined to the underside of the wing, and it will have a bevel cut as the wing folds over. So up until the part where the wing starts to curve is straight, and that, like I said, we just kind of guessed and decided is going to be our the end. Sorry, the beginning of the curve and the end of the straight line. So I'm going to draw a straight line coming down here. And what I'm going to do is I want to end just a little bit before this 50% cut. The aileron needs to be able to swing up and down. So if I go right to the line, it's going to cause issues. It's going to rub. And also, because of the way we build the wing, the top part of the wing, which is what we've traced out so far, it actually is going to have the 50% cut lines in it, which then bend to make the airfoil. And it's as it bends and as it creates the airfoil, this distance is actually going to get more narrow. Right? It's not going to be this wide when it's all done. It's actually going to be a little bit less because we're creating the airfoil with it. So we lose some of the space. So what we want to do, and this is all dependent on how wide the wing is. If your wing's more narrow, you're going to less in terms of centimeters. You're going to lose less. So there's not really an answer in terms of how much are you going to lose, but there is a little bit of a percentage. So when I'm looking at it, when I make the wing fit, in my view, when I'm doing this, I know that this line needs to be, if I went all the way here, if I make a guess here, if I go up, it needs to be about 1 centimeter in terms of the proportion here for me. So when I'm looking at it, that's about how much space I need. But again, if your wing's more narrow, you won't need a whole centimeter. If it's bigger, you might need more. So I'm going to draw that line to being about 1 centimeter shy. Because once it all is put together, that's going to be much more close. It'd be much more closer to the aileron size. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is bring over my line, and this should be the same degree of angle as the aileron cut. So I'm going to bring it to about here, and then for actually that's not straight. What I can do is draw it right over so I can see that it's the right angle, and then I can grab it and move it up, and so now I know for sure it's the same angle. Okay, and now this cut, you don't want it to be this line, you don't want it to be right up against where the aileron's going to swing, because again it'll touch, but you don't want it to be super wide because then it's going to look all weird. So you want to bring it just next to it. That way once that's cut, and it'll have free movement, but you're not going to see a big gap there. They should line up pretty good. Okay, so we've got that. And actually, hold on, I made a mistake there. Let's go back. We want to do what I just did, except we don't want to go back all the way. We want to, the trailing edge is actually going to not line up perfectly with this trailing edge. It's going to come in a little bit shallow. The reason for that is because, one, it's going to give extra stability. It actually adds a little bit of drag and slows the plane down. It makes the wing a little more stable because of the vortex and the wind turbulence that it creates on the backside of the trailing edge. But we want to decide how much. There's not a wrong answer, except you have to understand what it's going to do with the characteristics. So the more you give it, the more it's like creating a flap, like having your flaps down. So the larger the space is between your airfoil on top and then the trailing edge on the bottom. Let's say you decided, this is the right answer for me. This essentially creates a huge flap. So it's going to slow the plane down. It's going to give it a very floaty feel. It'll give it a good slow speed performance. But what also is impacted then is when it comes to design and then how you build the plane or how you put it together, not just in plans but actually building it, is you're creating a very small workspace for your spar to go. You're creating a small workspace for your airfoil to curve properly, and also for your servo to be installed. So there really it creates some other challenges if you make it that large. Flight Test has theirs like around here on the Spitfire. And it's great. It flies very well. If you were to bring it in and come down further like this, you'd have a little bit less drag created, and it would be a little quicker. Now, the pros and cons here in terms of the building side. Then, if you come straight across with an aileron this wide, for everything to line up, so the bottom is flat, right from the leading edge all the way to the trailing edge, it needs to be flat on the bottom. You have to add a spacer here so that everything lines up perfectly. If you come a little further, like from here, on this line, then the bottom wing can actually be glued directly to the bottom side of the wing, can be glued directly to the top. You don't need a spacer because it lines up right. And that also depends too on how wide your aileron is, because if you have this much of a gap between the trailing edge and then up for your aileron cutout, there's going to be a hole, an air pocket here. So you're going to create a scenario then where you may need to put a spacer here so that this side lines up properly. There isn't really, I don't have any way to tell you what the best thing to do is, or exactly where to put it. This is going to be dependent on the wing shape, the wing width, the chord. Everything is going to determine how this is going to line up. But what you first need to do is decide, what do you want to accomplish with the plane? Do you want it to be very stable, slow flying, or do you not really care, or how do you want to line up there? Make that decision, and then you need to work around the design side of it, right? So with this plane, with this specific one, I want to make it pretty floaty. I want it to be very stable. It could be a very slow flyer, without any problem. So with that in mind, I want a larger area, but I don't want to go this big. I want to bring it down a little bit. So to do that, I'm going to again come back over here, and I'm basically going to go about a quarter of the way down here. So I'm going to bring it up right next to it, and I'm going to cut it over. And this is not going to be a straight line. I want to follow the curve of the trailing edge on the top. And the easiest way to do that, instead of trying to copy it and trace it over, is just to select your wing, grab this section, copy it, and paste it. And now I have the exact same curve that I can line up. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to use my move tool. It's already selected, and I'm just going to kind of fish it around until I think it looks good. And now that's the same angle. This is a perfectly straight line, so I can just add on to it. And that's fine there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide to join all of these pieces together. So I'm going to go ahead and raster size and merge. And then I need to do this piece as well. And I'm calling this bottom wing. Okay, this is important that these two stay separate for now, because we actually have to flip this around and turn it once we're done. But we need to put a bunch of pieces in place, the spar, the servo placement, the spar hole, before we can do that. So we want to leave it here for now. Okay, so one thing I didn't go much into, deep into detail on is, okay, so what about this section, the under camber section of the wing? The traditional, flight test style wing has quite a bit of under camber on the wingtip, and this is so your wing does not tip stall. It does not want to drop. So if you drop your throttle and pull elevator up or turn into the wind and you kind of stall for a second, if you want the plane to remain stable at slow speeds and in those scenarios, the more under camber you have really is going to help with that a lot. But it's also going to make your plane create a huge amount of drag. So if you wanted to go faster, or we're trying to build a more slippery feeling plane that responded immediately and had that quickness to it, this wouldn't be a good idea. These kind of designs with these wingtips, they lose speed really fast, so they don't have the weight to them, and they also don't perform well with high speed. So you want to decide what kind of wing, again, and that should go along the same lines of what you've already done here. What kind of wing do I want to design? What kind of flight characteristics do I want out of the plane? Again, I want this one to be very stable, floaty. So this is a lot of under camber actually. You could probably cut this down to here and still have a stable plane because of how large the chord is here. But I want this to be nice and stable and feel solid. I'm not worried about the speed or anything on this plane. So when you choose how much under camber you want, it's really going to be one, you can go off like a percentage base. So this is almost, I don't know, it's about a quarter, maybe a little more of the whole wing half. If you cut that in half, that might be a good place, like a general place to start. But to really know how is this going to feel, you have to build it and fly it. I can only give you guidelines or what to kind of, what range you can start in. So maybe an eighth is a standard amount. Then the more you cut that down, the faster your stall speed is. So with the wing right now, let's just say if your stall speed was 15 miles an hour, if you brought it to here, your stall speed, now is 18 miles an hour. If you brought it up here, maybe now it's 22 or something. It's going to start dropping where your plane can't perform at a very slow speed anymore. It'll lose stability and maybe start to fall out of the sky. Those are just estimates, right? Those are not exact at all, but just to give you an idea of how it is going to cut it down. It's pretty significant. So the under camber that you have is very important in determining how you want the plane to fly. So we picked this amount because, again, I want it to be stable and slow. I don't mind the drag or anything, so it's not a big deal. The next thing I want to do is I need to get an idea of where am I going to put my spar. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the spar that I created already. And again, I recommend doing this. I recommend creating a spar and a spar hole, because you can use this now on almost any of your designs. You can just grab it and paste it over. And I've made it so that my notches are close enough together that you can fit two on the wing, even if you have a lot of under camber, right? So I'm just going to kind of guess right now. I'm going to put this in wherever I want, just to get it in place. And then we're going to talk about where exactly you want it to go. But for now, I'm just going to get these lined up so that there's my spar hole that's eventually going to get placed on the bottom half of the wing, and then the spar is going to be its own little piece there. Okay, so I'm going to rename this spar. Oops. Spar hole. And this is going to be my spar. Okay, so what I have to determine now is, where does this spar go? One of the things that you'll want to keep in mind, if you have wings that are swept or angled or not relatively straight, your spar, you're going to want your spar to be straight across the wings. No matter what the wing shape is, you're going to want the spar to be straight. Why? One, it's going to be stronger. If you have a spar that's bent or angled, it's not as strong. And two, if you're going to reinforce this with carbon fiber or aluminum or anything, if it's not straight, that becomes very difficult. I'm not talking about dihedral straight. I'm talking about, can I make my wing spar go between the two halves of the wing in a straight fashion? And you should be able to on most designs. If you can't, you can make some adjustments here and there, but really you're going to want that to be the case, right? You want to be able to do that. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at the wing that you're designing. Make your spar so that wherever it's placed on the wing, it's not like, when I mean not straight, I mean like this, where it's at an angle, right? Because now when I join my wing halves, the spars are like a V, and there's no strength there then with that spar. Okay. Alright, so we've got our spar joined between the hole, and then so I move it around here freely. But what I want to do now to really decide where's the spar going to go is I have to decide what's my airfoil going to look like. The airfoil, the highest peak of the airfoil is where the spar is going to sit. It's going to sit in between that and hold shape and strength there. So if my airfoil is really high up here, right, if I have a super gnarly thin airfoil like this, the spar cannot really fit there. It's not going to fit in that gap. So how the plane is designed, or how you design the airfoil, is really important. One, for how it's going to fly, but two, where the spar is going to go. So when we talk about how it's going to fly, there's a couple different things you can do with the airfoil for your first plane, or for just if you're just designing and you want a standard good flying plane. Then what you're going to want to do, and this is what I've done so far, is determine, okay, what's the length of my plane, the wing, sorry. So the big part is the top. Oops, I didn't see how long that was. Let me do that again. That is, we're going to say 25. We're going to say 25 for easy math. So if it's 25 centimeters, the first part of your airfoil and the second part of your airfoil should extend to about halfway of the whole wing's width. So if this is 25, if I cut this down, and this is just rough, and my numbers aren't perfect there, but this is rough. So there's my middle line, roughly. Okay. So if that's my middle line, then I want this hole from here all the way to here roughly to be straight. No more. There's two bend pieces, right? You have your leading bend, and then your second bend, which makes the airfoil, and then it trails down to the end. So the trailing edge should be longer, is really what we're getting at, than the leading edge in terms of how quickly it rises and how quickly it falls. So what that looks like then, and this is just a rule of thumb to start with. Again, every plane's different. What you want to get out of the plane is different, but this is a great place to start so that you can at least design something that's going to fly. This is an airfoil that works, but then you can tweak it as you want to achieve different things out of the plane. So with that being said, I'm going to then look at, okay, how wide do I want my first line to be? Now, if the first half of the wing is the entire airfoil in terms of the front side, I'm not just going to cut it in half. So if I just cut it in half here, then my first one would start right about here, which is a bit wide in my opinion. Now, when I say wide, that means it's going to be very gradual initially. I don't want it quite that gradual. I want a little bit more on the leading edge in terms of the curve. So instead of going right at half, I'm going to go a little bit above half. And now I'm going to follow the leading edge, for the most part, all the way to the wingtip. Okay? So it's about the same distance going down. And this is actually going to be red, so we're going to go ahead and paint that red. And then for the second one, remember, I want it to be done by the middle point, but it doesn't have to be on the middle point. That's not necessary. So I'm going to come right about to here, and then as I come back, I'm actually going to come toward the first line. I'm not going to keep it wide, right? Because the airfoil should narrow slightly, just like the wing narrows as you get towards the wingtip. Okay, so I'm just going to drop that there, and I'm going to see what it looks like. So I'm going to remove the spar here so I can't see it, and I'm going to remove that other reference line that I made, just so I can get an idea. I want to see, what does this look like, and I'll even remove the wing bottom. Okay, so if that's what I decided, that's my airfoil, right? I have my leading edge, I have the initial crest, I have the flat spot on top, and then I have my trailing edge going down. And now that I look at this from, stepping back a little bit, I don't like how it looks that much. I think I need to change a couple things. So the first thing I want to change is I want to look at this line here, and I actually want to change the angle a little bit. I want to come down a little bit. And then I'm going to remove it. So I like that a little bit better. When I say I like that a little better, it's the shape here that I'm referring to, so the flat spot of the airfoil should slightly taper as it goes from the wing middle to the wing tip. This is a little more gradual here. Doesn't follow the line perfectly, but that's not a huge deal. And yeah, I think I like that so far. So now what I want to do is introduce the spar again. And this is where this is important, because the spar is going to have to sit in this section, because it's the form piece that's going to keep the airfoil with the proper shape. And so all I need to make sure is, can 2 widths of foam fit all the way in between these 2 airfoil lines. Now 2 widths of foam is going to look like this. There's roughly 1 centimeter. Okay, so it's pretty thin, right? Once the foam spar is folded over and glued and everything, it's not super thick. So this is a pretty big wing. I'm not gonna have an issue anywhere. This can fit, no problem. So now I can decide where do I want the spar to actually sit. So I look at the spar now. I can put it, I'll bring the wing bottom back in because the spar is actually gonna end way before here, right? So I can fit it easily anywhere I want. Like I can bring it a little far further. About there is about as far as forward I can get it, actually, or about there. So it doesn't interfere, excuse me, with the curve of the airfoil. So I'm going to put it right in the middle, just so I know I'm not going to have any issues. And I know that then the other side of the wing can have the exact same spar and it's perfectly straight, and there's no problem there. So now what I'm going to decide is where do I want the tabs to go. There's no right answer here. The tabs are just for alignment. They don't really even add any strength. So I'm just going to say right here is good. And then I'm going to take the wing bottom and the spar hole, and I'm going to join those together. So now the wing bottom has the spar hole on it. And now I'm going to take the spar and I'm going to go ahead and cut it and add my bottom, or my line here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that down. And then for the neck part here, the servo is going to sit right in here on the bottom of the wing. So I'm just going to cut it here to leave enough room for the servo. Okay, so what I want to do now is remove, where's my spar? There. Remove the rest of this. We don't need any of that. So I can cut that, and I can zoom in here. Actually, going a little further. There's that. Do the same thing on this side. Alright. And now I need to kind of clean up all my layers here, okay? So the spar is done. We've built the length, or we got the position, we got the length of it and everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and move this out of the way for now. Oops, no, I don't want to do that yet, because I need to join the ends to it. So let's go ahead and remove some things here. Let's get rid of the wing top. Let's get rid of the wing bottom. So there's one of my lines, there's my other line. So these two and the spar need to join. There, spar's done. Okay, move the spar out of the way. Wing bottom, wing top can come back. And the rest of these lines now, what are they? I need to find out. I don't want this one anymore. That was my reference line, so is that one. That's my reference line as well. There's my 50% score cuts for the airfoil. What is this one? We'll get rid of this one as well. So these two need to be joined to the wing top. So now my wing top has my aileron, it has my 50% score cuts, and that's it. And then my wing bottom has my spar hole, and then the rest of the shape here that I want. The last thing I need to put into position here for reference is the servo line. If you're going to add it, you would make a marker here for the servo guide. I'm not going to worry about that right now because I might need to make this bar a little bit longer once I get to those fine tuning details. So for right now, I'm going to say the wing bottom is okay. And what I'm going to do is do the flip, so we can actually create the wing plan here. We can join the pieces. So I'm going to take the wing bottom and I'm going to copy it and open up a new layer, and then I'm going to flip it vertically. I'm going to copy it again, and now I'm going to paste it back on my, actually I need to go back one step because we are not done with this guy. Let's just close this. I forgot one line here. On the wing bottom, we need to draw this end line. We need to close it up. So this is a straight line to here. Again, for those straight lines, I'm holding Shift, which locks the line into place, just in case you forgot that. And I'm going to join that last shape to the wing bottom. So there's my wing bottom. We're going to copy it again, and we're going to flip it, copy it again, and paste it in. Okay, so now we have a wing bottom, and I'm going to actually hide the current wing bottom. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm doing that because if I have to come back and make a change, once we change the angle of this and move it around, it becomes really difficult to make changes that are straight and nice. So usually I will leave this one in case I have to go back and move something like spar placement or whatever, so I can do it with straight lines and then I can re-flip it and turn it again. So I'm going to leave this one, and we'll call it old bottom. And then this new one is going to get messed around here. So what I need to do is put it into place, and I need to change the angle of it so it lines up. So if I start on the end here, if I do a Control T, it brings up the ability to twist it and turn it. If I hold down Shift now, if I turn it, it will lock it into the major degrees, 90, 45, whatever. I don't want that. I want to free spin it. So I'm going to let go of Shift, and I'm just going to move my mouse around. So I go to the corner where the arrow turns into a curvy arrow here, and now I can move it freely. Put it in place. What I need to happen now is I need this line to match up right here on the corner of the wing top, and I need this line to match up right on the corner of the leading edge here. So to see this, I got to zoom in pretty good and get an idea. Okay, so if this is touching right here, that's the touching there. What am I seeing over here? It's not touching yet, so I need to give it a few more degrees, and then I come back, reset it. It's touching, and I come back. It's still a little bit more of a gap, so I need to give it a few more degrees. I'll go back over here, reset it, and then there it is. It's touching now. Now to make sure it's not too much overlap, I'm going to go ahead and move it just so I can see. That's pretty good. So that is touching with one click over. It's actually floating now here, so I'm going to bring it back just a small amount, just so it's, oh, there it is. Photoshop was just going weird on me. Okay, so there's touching, and then one click more on the mouse, and then yeah, it's touching perfect. Okay, so now this step is important because what we just did is we set up the plan, or we're going to set up the plan so that when you cut this middle line 50% and then you fold over, the position of the underside of the wing will match as we have designed it here. So if I go ahead and hit enter now, it's going to make that change, and if I show that, so now when we put it on foam, cut it out, flip it over, it's going to line up where it's supposed to be. Okay, that's why we just did that. Before we get any further, I'm going to go ahead and save. I haven't done that in a bit, just so we don't have any issues there. So I've flipped over the bottom side of the wing, and now I need to make this line here a 50% cut. So I'm just going to trace over it with a red mark. So that's the same position, and we're going to go ahead and make it red. And then if I select the wing top, which is what has that line on it right now, I can just go ahead and erase that line to expose the red underneath. And then there's our line. Looks like I was a little bit shy there, so I'm just going to move it up just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to take that line, I'm going to join it to the wing top. So they're one piece now, and then I'm going to join this new layer 1 here to wing top, and we now have the wing. So I can grab the wing, I can open up a new layer, and we're going to do it 30 by 20. The size of a Dollar Tree piece of foam board, and we're going to leave it at resolution 30. Paste it in. Actually, I'm going to make the background white first, just so we can see it. There it is. There's your wing half. One thing I didn't mention previous is that I am making this this plane with a 40-inch wingspan. So if I draw this line, we get about 101.5, which ends up being roughly 40 inches. Now we're going to go ahead and grab the spar. We'll paste it over here as well, just so we have that. And that is the completed wing for right now. Just to recap, with this design, we were giving it quite a bit of under camber. I want it to be a nice, stable, slow-flying plane. We positioned the spar so that it can go straight across both wing halves. We have decided the trailing edge is going to be decently large. I don't know that it'll need a spacer yet. That will be something we'll have to play around with here in the in the next few videos to see what kind of spacer is needed, if any. And then we're also going to determine how the fuselage hole for the wing is going to look, and we'll talk about how we accomplish that. But for now, the major design of the wing is done, and now we just have the small tweaks that may come into play. Adding dihedral to the wing, determining is there a spacer, where's the servo placement going to be, those little things that come a little bit later. But for now, we're going to wrap it up to finish video 3 here. This one's been a long one, but I hope I explained some of the decisions points you have with designing the wing, as well as gave you a good idea of how to actually put down the lines. How do you actually make the wing plan? So thanks guys for tuning in, and please, if you have any questions, write me a comment here on YouTube or wherever you saw this posted. I'd love to interact with you and make sure that I can answer any questions you guys have about the process. Thanks guys, have a good one.